bonus source
Yeah,
of
and
help.
you get a bonus one. When you're doing all this customer listening, you're also picking up on the voice of your employees, right? Your agents, the people that are responding on the phone, even the employees might be communicating back to other employees in back office systems. That information also is super, super important to understand how is the employee doing? Are they performing at peak level? Where can they be, coached to be better at their jobs?
Welcome to the CX and Culture Connection, which is the show for CX leaders who are looking to improve the quality of their experiences and the return on their investment from customer experience. I'm here today with Sid Banerjee, who is a well-known and successful entrepreneur in the CX space, who is also playing a leadership role now at Qualtrics since the acquisition of his company Clarabridge by Qualtrics last year. So I'm excited to have Sid on the show to talk about how you can drive greater ROI from your investments in CX, and also the connection between CX and your employee experience and your culture.
Very good. Thank you, Matt. Nice to be on your show.
Sid, as we get started, maybe you could share a little bit about your own journey from the founding of Clarabridge, and how has joining Qualtrics helped advance the vision you have that you were working on with Clarabridge and since then?
Yeah, thank you. It's an interesting question, and something I thought about a lot over the period of time when we were being acquired, and then obviously since acquisition. I started the company Clarabridge back in the kind of the mid early 2000s, 2006 to be exact. And the vision for the company and the products we built at the time was that we believed that there was an opportunity to help organizations understand and tap into the interactions that they had between companies and customers that were unstructured, where at the time, most of the information that was being collected and synthesized by companies was structured data. Think rows and columns or information that's in a database. We wanted to build a platform that was fundamentally oriented around collecting unstructured data, sentences, paragraphs, anything that basically is language based, and use technologies to qualify, to quantify, to categorize, and then to analyze that information. And very early on, in the early 2010s, we realized that customer experience data, which is really the language of the customer when they interact on a phone call, or when they leave a feedback on a survey, or they're posting information online on reviews, or even Facebook or Twitter. That information is highly, highly valuable to large organizations and small organizations that really want to understand what drives happiness, what drives emotion, what drives loyalty, what drives effort, in the way that customers and companies interact with each other. Because those markers of effort or loyalty or satisfaction have a big impact on how productive that relationship is, and frankly, how much money a company makes from a customer, and how much a customer feels like they're getting good brand equity with that relationship. So for about the first 6-7 years of the company, the focus was really on building that listening architecture and partnering with a lot of companies like Qualtrics and others that had really rich content, but could benefit from the kind of analysis and the AI technology that we brought to bear. Starting about 3 years ago, we realized that there might be more power in putting the two companies and the two technologies together. And what Qualtrics had prior to acquisition, and of course still now, is this rich, rich data lake, or data moat, if you will, of all things customer experience. They collect, or I should say we collect data from market research studies, from panels, from benchmarks, from a wide range of customer experience programs at various stages of customer journeys. When a customer is onboarding or using a product or service, or potentially threatening to churn, there's information that gets collected across those customer journeys that Qualtrics has in the form of surveys and panels and research. We bring the language of the actual customer interaction, which is what Clarabridge had been focused on, and now Qualtrics, the calls, the chats, the long form interactions, and more recently, even the automated interactions that happen when a customer is interacting with a chatbot or an IVR, or some sort of a technology that's acting in the place of a virtual agent or a virtual representative of the company. And so now we have the ability to really sense customer feedback, emotions, intentions at every stage of the journey. And we're actually able to listen to the actual voice of the customer and the voice of the employee in a way that I think has truly magnified the potential of what we bring to bear now.
There's an expression that I always love with ratings and reviews, which is one of the unstructured data sources. I
Yes.
know it's one of many, but it's one of the ones a lot of people focused on early on. Um, that the 3-star reviews tell you what you need to do to get a 5-star review.
Yes.
And you see a lot of the emotion and the language people are using, just like people reveal their intent in a search bar.
Hmm.
They reveal a lot through the what they share in a rating or review. But there's so many other interactions. In fact, they're growing exponentially. Qualtrics has this great chart that I've seen you guys use where you show the race between the different sources of data
Right.
and how live chat and uh, other forms of unstructured have now surpassed social.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. It's been interesting. We started tracking this in the sort of the mid 2000 teens, and if you look specifically at the period of time between really 2018 and the present day, 2023, what happened is before COVID, which was really early 20 and 18 and 19, the primary data of customer experience analysis was the survey and the social data source. Um, Starting around 2019, partly because the technology matured enough, AI engineering and scalability was scalable enough that we could actually listen to long form conversations and interactions. We produced products that came onto market right around the time that people were really starting to be able to accurately tease out insights from language, and so we started to see growth primarily in the contact center. And in 2020, when COVID hit, a lot of organizations actually, at least for a short period of time, shut down contact centers and dramatically accelerated the deployment of chat technologies. Both human to human chat interactions as well as chatbots. And so that source spiked dramatically in 6 months, from sort of March to the fall winter of 2020. And so we were, I think, well positioned as a business to really take advantage of this explosion in conversational data at a time when the traditional forms of human interaction, in-store interaction, were falling off. And I think most organizations realized once they were able to tap into that content source that you can't go back, right? I mean, that's now increasingly a vital part of the customer experience. And to your point about things like some emotion and effort, we started to do some really interesting research around that time, and we realized that when you can pick up a sentiment marker, whether something is good or bad, that has a high correlation to how loyal a customer is going to be. The extremely positive markers around products and services, very high loyalty attachment, and likewise the negative feedback. Effort is another interesting language marker. When people describe things being hard, right, hard to do, taking a long time, not being resolved, effort markers tend to have a high correlation not only to loyalty but to cost, right? How expensive is it for a company to do what they need to do to basically be responsive to a customer? And if you can identify, isolate, and reduce those high effort occurrences in customer journeys, not only will your customers be happy, but you'll actually create a more efficient operation, whether it's in sales or services. And so we started to show these markers weren't just interesting analytics, they actually had a very high correlation to how to drive efficiency, process improvement, and obviously customer experience satisfaction and loyalty. There's really a sort of a virtuous cycle where once you start doing these things, you start to see high value to the organization and the customer.
There's so many layers to what you're saying that I'd love for our audience to kind of hit on a few of them and then dive deeper uh,
Mm-hmm.
and have a conversation about those different points. If you allow me to tee up a couple of these layers, Sid.
Sure.
One is the way that you build your insights up front that allow you to shape your CX vision, that allow you to make choices about where to focus to improve the CX.
Right.
And the art and science of customer listening using the AI and the models you're building and training on all the data is allowing you to build much deeper insights that inform the development of your CX strategy with insights. So that's just one layer.
Yeah.
Another layer is then how do you drive ongoing measurement of the congruence of the experience with your vision? So if you once you've identified the things you want to focus on, you can actually listen more intently for the specific things that you decide are important. And actually, with the unstructured data, you can listen in a way that doesn't require as many upfront structured questions as a way to track all those improvements. You call that intelligent scoring to be able to
Right.
track things throughout the journey and measure congruence. So these are just two of the layers. I'll pause there, but would love to get, the last layer would actually be to, now that I said I won't do it, I'm going to do it. The last layer is to link the ongoing improvements to business outcomes, which you talked,
Yes.
which is
Well,
much easier to do the more granular you get. If you're at the level of NPS or CSAT, there's not as clear a link.
yeah, let me answer the sort of the second observation, and then go back to the first one, which is sort of how to map this to business outcomes, and then I'll kind of talk about how you
Mhm.
use the AI to do that. Right? We again, we've been in this kind of business of really deeply mining the language of customer experience now for, well, since we started the company, which was over 15 years ago. But I think really applying the AI technologies that we have today over the last 5 or 6 years, and we've identified four broad classes of business outcomes that if you can kind of shine a bright light on achieving those outcomes by really looking at customer experience, there's very high ROI. The four main outcomes are identifying what drives loyalty and satisfaction, because that obviously affects things like lifetime value and customer retention and other things. The second is identifying what drives efficiency in an organization and quality, primarily in the customer facing sort of channels of your business. The third area is what drives, I'm just going to call it strategic change or managed change. And then the fourth is what drives risk and compliance, risk reduction and compliance adherence. And so when we think about those four classes of problems, if you're looking for loyalty, and customer preservation, you're looking for the markers of things that customers like, that basically keep them coming back, and also looking for the markers of interactions that suggest people are unhappy, dissatisfied, and are not getting the products or service they want. You also look for those effort markers, right? The things that frustrate a customer because they're not resolving issues the first time or the fifth time, right? And if you can identify and reduce the negative occurrences and maximize the positive occurrences, there's almost always a lift in loyalty and satisfaction. On the efficiency side, there we're looking for markers, again, of effort, but also uniquely when we start mining the language of customers, we can look for duration of interaction, right? How long is someone on a chat? How many times does a person call back or chat back to resolve an issue? And also, what language do they use when they describe failure of channels that it might have been low cost or more automated, so that they then come into a higher cost or human intensive interaction. So we look for people saying, hey, I tried to solve this on the web, I couldn't do it, or I got an error message, or I was using your chatbot, but it didn't understand what I was saying. When you identify those things, you can start to drive improvements in the lower cost channels, make them better, and then everyone gets happy and you save money, right? In the third category, which is the managed change, this is sort of oftentimes the conversation you want to have with an executive in a business saying, look, in 2020 X, right, pick your year, what are the two or three big rocks you want to crack, right? What are the things you're trying to do? Is it launch a new product? Is it acquire and integrate a company? Is it start to fix a particular part of the business that is underperforming? And then if you can laser focus, your analytics on those strategic change initiatives, not only are you going to help them achieve the results they want, but you're going to be aligned to a very senior kind of priority, which I think is important. And this is where it's important not just to kind of build without asking. It's important to have that conversational relationship with executives in the business. And then the fourth area, and I'm sorry I'm talking a lot, but I'll close out here on the risk and compliance. Your customers tell you when they're having interactions that are risky, right? If you're a bank, there's ways to trap and quantify. Are the complaints from a customer falling into the category of a CFPB violation, right? Or a Truth in Lending Act violation? If you're in healthcare, is there a HIPAA violation? Or even if you're a CPG, a product company, and someone's complaining about product quality or safety, those are things you want to quickly figure out. Is it a problem? How big a problem it is? And then make sure you investigate, adjudicate, and if necessary, fix, right? Remediate the problem. And the language of the customer is a huge early warning indicator of these issues. If you can catch them early, you can minimize your risk. Those are the high value. I have a fifth one, which is important to note. While we're doing all this customer
This is a
listening,
bonus source of
yeah, and
value.
you get a bonus one. When you're doing all this customer listening, you're also picking up on the voice of your employees, right? Your agents, the people that are responding on the phone, even the employees might be communicating back to other employees in back office systems. That information also is super important to understand. How is the employee doing? Are they performing at peak level? Where can they be coached to be better at their jobs? And if they're if they're identifying problems in the company that affect the employee or the customer, you can start to correlate some really interesting things that will not only make the employees better at their jobs, but also have a derivative benefit for the customer experience too.
This is something that we'll come back to later in the discussion, the CX EX intersection.
Sure.
And clearly, it's something that's near and dear to my heart, given the title of this podcast is the CX and culture connection.
Sure.
Um, Sid, one of the things you've been talking about now is the path to value,
Mm-hmm.
that there are different paths to create value.
Yes.
And as an executive in a company, as a CX leader, you're going to be, the audience is going to be thinking about, how am I delivering value, and these, what you're providing are really fertile grounds to work on to
Mm-hmm.
kind of create that value. I'd like to throw in another kind of big picture source of value, which is cutting across all the things you're talking about, which is you're creating a flywheel for growth and for delivering value.
Mm-hmm.
And that the way you embrace tools like Qualtrics XM Discover actually help you free up cost that you can reinvest in some of these growth opportunities. So a lot of the opportunities were growth and cost and risk oriented,
Right.
but whether it's the research and testing that's being done, I've seen clients that save 20 to 50% of their research and testing budget by applying modern methods. I've also seen companies that rationalize the number of vendors. Now, don't get scared because you often benefit from that. If the
Yes.
companies have 10 different vendors doing
Well, one
things,
of the
then they
benefits of
reduce it.
being part of a company like Qualtrics now and being acquired, to be honest, is that people are picking strategic, partners increasingly
Yeah,
to do
well,
that
in
work.
the past, when Clarabridge was independent and I was involved in vendor selection, often it would be Qualtrics and Clarabridge,
Right.
or another company and Clarabridge. But Clarabridge was more often than not in the mix.
Mm-hmm.
And now, as part of Qualtrics, I'm sure that helps differentiate Qualtrics having your technology integrated into their platform, because you were the undisputed market leader before you were acquired, and that
Yeah.
helps them strengthen their hand.
I was in a meeting with one of the large kind of transportation and logistics companies not that long ago, and they asked me, when we think about Qualtrics, how are you different, right? How are you better or different than a lot of other vendors that are kind of competing in a lot of these areas of, feedback analytics and conversational analytics and others? And I think one of the kind of the unifying themes that is, I think, why the power of what we're trying to do as part of a broader Qualtrics business is so important is we have built essentially think of it as a nervous system and a brain for customer experience. The nervous system is essentially, the nerves that collect and sense information from a wide range of different signals inside and outside an organization, right? It's the signals at a location, it's the signals in a contact center, it's the signals, when people are communicating through digital channels, or even, navigating on digital applications and websites. Those signals come into essentially a central brain, which is really where the language and AI kind of architecture lives and synthesizes insights from that. And once we have that, just like a human brain or an AI brain, which is what this is, right, will do is it'll then detect patterns and themes, right, and say, hey, here's something going on. That's a good insight. It'll detect alert conditions that require actions, right? So you can say, hey, I see an error condition or an opportunity or whatnot. That can trigger actions. I can also, in a sense, forecast the future. I can run predictions, right? And say, if I see things going a certain direction, I'm predicting a certain outcome that's good or bad. And if it's good, let it go. If it's bad, intervene, right? And then the last thing, which is really where I think Qualtrics has started to kind of turbocharge a lot of what we'd originally built at Clarabridge, is this concept of automation, right? Where once I have information in this brain, I don't just bring data into the brain, right? The brain also can send signals out to flex the muscles and to do things, right? Essentially, we have the ability through triggered automations to then, inject an action into a CRM or identify a marketing opportunity or intervene on a risk or compliance issue. And so now we are effectively almost like an organic part of the customer experience ecosystem, because we've done the collection, we've done the synthesis, we've done the analytics, and now we're doing the actioning.
So
That's the power of what we're doing now.
I'm going to link this to what I see as the third cost opportunity that can fund your growth-oriented investments,
Okay.
which is the cost of quality.
Mm-hmm.
So as there's the research and testing, there's the vendor rationalization, and then there's the cost of quality. The third one can actually be orders of magnitude bigger than the other two in some cases.
Yes.
It's not just the calls to the call center. but there's the cost of quality of getting quality right, which is enormous in banks and healthcare and other markets,
Yes.
that creating this continuous improvement cycle to work, pairing quality management practices with data science and human-centered design with tools like Qualtrics allow you to get better, faster, and cheaper, get the results
Right.
with the cost of quality.
That's exactly right. And I'll tell another story. This is a company in the travel space, and they joked to me. They said, we have really good chatbot containment, right? Which is a metric you often use to say, hey, my customers, call in, they get a chatbot, and they don't have to go talk to an agent. And I said, great. What was the percentage? They said, oh, we had about 65, 70% containment. And I said, that's actually a good metric. He said, well, you don't understand. Our chatbot is like the Hotel California. You can check in, but you can never leave, right? So what happens is you're in a chatbot and the chatbot's not helping you and you want to, pound out or zero out to an agent. It doesn't let you, okay? The cost of quality here is this is a customer that's not getting the job done. The metric that they have historically measured the performance of their chatbot it's the wrong metric, right? Because they've basically made it hard for the customer to get an issue resolved. But you have to dig below that. And the important thing is to get to quality, the chatbot has to work, which it isn't in this particular customer's case, or it needs to be able to quickly recognize that it's not and allow a different channel to resolve. And those are the kinds of things that you only really understand when you apply these listening technologies to the technique and say, what do I need to do to make these automated technologies better, higher quality? When you do that, then the customer actually isn't stuck in a black hole, chatbot they can't get out of. Right? That's the cost of quality. The first time someone has a chance to renew or escape that customer, they will, because they are not going to have good experiences there.
So, one of the things you've been talking about throughout the discussion is the emotion that people feel at these peaks in the experience or the valleys in the experience.
Mm-hmm.
And to geek out for a second, people remember the peaks and the valleys and the last thing that happens.
Yeah.
They won't remember the meh moments. They'll remember the things that are high or
Highs and lows.
low or
Yeah.
the very end, which is why they give you a candy at the end of the dinner with your bill, so that the
Right.
last thing you get is not the check, right?
Yep. It's
Even
true.
if you had dessert, they'll still give you a candy with the bill,
Yeah.
so that the last thing you experience is something good, right? Um, that's why Southwest cares about baggage,
Mm-hmm.
is the last thing you experience in the flight, right? But throughout the experience, those peaks and valleys create an emotional response. And someone getting frustrated with the Hotel California experience will create a negative emotion.
Mm-hmm.
Similarly, the peaks will create a positive emotion. And you talked about using unstructured data and listening to the markers to listen for emotion.
Right.
Could you talk a little bit about how the practice and ability to listen for emotion has evolved and how that's changing the way companies approach continuous improvement efforts for customer experience?
Yeah, it. I like to talk in analogies, so I'll use another analogy, not the Hotel California one, but if you think about customer experiences, there's like stages of customer experience grief, if you will, right? When you have a bad experience, the first thing you feel is emotion, right? I'm not getting what I need done, and so you will express frustration, anger. You'll try to escalate, right? You might get passive aggressive, but that's still an emotion, right? The second thing is once you've calmed down a bit you will try to resolve. You'll try to get maybe a little bit more left-brained and start to focus on what can I do to fix this problem. And then finally, once you've accepted that you've had a bad experience, if you have the time and the mindset, you will often provide feedback, which is the long form reviews and filling out surveys and other things. But emotion is an early warning signal for customer experience. And if you can pick up emotion when it happens, where it happens, and really understand what is driving that emotion, it is the earliest warning signal for things that you should be fixing. And to your point about the journeys, focus on the peak emotion, because the peak is what's going to be remembered, both the peak positive and the peak negative, and also focus on the final emotion, right? Which is how is that person at the end of an interaction? If the end of the interaction is unresolved, that's negative. If it's obviously negative, that's negative. And if it's positive, then you've actually got resolution. So we are very focused on understanding emotional intensity, not just detecting the emotion, but saying, is Is it very high, very negative? We actually, have put a scale to this stuff. We look at the words in an interaction or feedback, and we score it on an 11-point scale. So +5 being the most positive, -5 being the most negative. And then we look for where it occurs in a call, right? If it occurs in the intent of the call, if it occurs mid, and if it calls in the end. So those things give us the ability to kind of address exactly the things you're talking about.
So we talked so far about the ratings and reviews and the social media
Mm-hmm.
and the call center as sources of insights.
Yeah.
And a lot of those apply in industries where there's a lot of customer service, like financial services and healthcare and travel and hospitality,
Yeah.
um, utilities. These are markets that will have call centers, and they'll have a lot more interaction with people that isn't purely self-service as easily. Also, in consumer markets, there's a much greater volume of calls and of social media interactions than in some B2B markets. But
True.
B2B markets are also a ripe ground for improvement here, not just in the call center. Could you maybe let's talk for a little bit about how the growth of unstructured data and some of the AI applications are creating new opportunity in the B2B space, not just limited to the call center, although I'm happy to address that as well.
Yeah, I think there's, well, in kind of in my experience, I think there's sort of two kinds of B2B that we work with. One would be what I would call B2B2C, and the other is the straight B2B. And a B2B2C would be organizations like insurance companies, banks that often are supporting,
Most consumer goods fall into that
yeah,
category.
consumer goods because they
They
sell
sell to
through a retail
retailers.
supply
Yeah.
chain. Exactly. So the first order of interaction is often the business either provider, right? In the case of healthcare, it's the doctors or medical units. In the case of CPG, it's the retailers or supply chain distributing companies. In the case of banking, especially when you're aggregating things like 401k plans, pension retirement plans, those things, or even in the case of Medicare, right? You've got Medicare going through private companies, going through end customers. There's a whole B2B that back end where it's really important to understand how is the kind of the top business supporting kind of the lower level network of businesses. And that has a huge impact for the top companies, because if they're doing well, each business relationship is not worth, a few hundred to a few $1,000s a year. They're millions to tens of millions of dollars a year, right? So there's a lot of value. And those B2B2C customers often do have contact centers, digital and e-commerce platforms, other things where there's a lot of unstructured and conversational data to be picked up. In the more traditional B2B companies, and this could be things like software companies or organizations that are just selling to small businesses from big businesses, the touch points tend to be more human still. There's not as much automation, but it is important to understand the feedback from the customer to the rep or the support organization. So there we do look for things like ticketing systems, how many open cases are there, how do people feel during traditional and after traditional touch points, sales touch points, service touch points. So there is still a lot more reliance on surveys, but even with surveys, in the B2B relationship, you often do find longer form feedback in those surveys. People actually will type up a lot more qualitative feedback. So we are seeing B2B is actually a fertile kind of ground for CX analysis and improvement in both B2B2C and traditional B2B.
So the conversations
Mm-hmm.
have become a source of data from the call center,
Right.
because you can turn that into text. Just like a rating review is already text, you can turn a call into
Yeah.
text. But increasingly, the meetings in B2B are video meetings that so what's okay and what's not okay if you want to listen in
Yeah.
to the conversations over Zoom or Teams or other things, as because people are doing it in the call center, it's kind of expected.
Right.
But what's okay in the for the sales call as opposed to the service call?
So I'll tell you what we recommend, right? I mean, see, from a Qualtrics perspective, there is increasingly digital conversations in B2B interactions, just like you and I are having this conversation over of a web-based recording platform, right? So sales meetings, mortgage underwriting, you name it, right? B2B discussions around how to install and negotiate a sales deal. There's a lot of interactions happening on platforms like the ones we're using right here.
The
And
conversations now have digital footprints.
they do have digital footprints. And now we would recommend always letting the customer know if it's a business with another business, we would like to record this call just so we can, have a record of the
It's the
conversation.
same as mining an email. It's just people don't expect it. It's not the norm.
Correct. And here's what gets interesting. We have been seeing when you take a long conversation, like a phone call can be long, right? A digital call for support or whatever could be 10, 20 minutes sometimes. These web conversations can be longer. They can be 15 to 1, 2 hours, minutes to 1, 2 hours. And so there's three main values in mining these interactions that are more person to person or digital. One is to summarize them, right? To say in a 1 hour call, what were the highlights? What were the lowlights? What were the main concerns voiced and issues resolved? And the current generation, and I say current because it's really current over the last 9 to 12 months, of generative AI technologies are very, very good at taking arbitrarily long conversations, even multi-party conversations, and summarizing them into concise, narratives, right? What happened, what started, what was resolved or escalated, et cetera.
So
And
there's the
so,
time that's spent in the meeting,
yes,
but then there's also the time it takes to summarize the meeting and create the action, which in like a call might be 3 minutes to summarize and define the action. If you save that every time, that's a lot of value for the enterprise.
correct. So there's a ton of efficiency. If I'm a salesperson or a support person and I want to know what were the main themes across X number of meetings a week or a month, that summarization capability then also lends itself to very powerful analytics. So I can start to see what are the trends with my customers, what are the concerns or objections being raised. So I can start to improve my interactions with my customers because this sort of summarization analytics capability gives me insight as to how I can do my job better.
So
Yeah. And it also
beyond
gives feedback to the leaders and managers on what they're seeing as trends and opportunities in the way that they interact with their business customers as
yeah,
well.
we could go on for a while imagining the art of the possible of all the different things you could do. And, for our audience, a little food for thought. It's not just the sales meetings, like kind of like marketing, sales, and service. What we're doing is broadening the aperture for where
Yes.
there are digital footprints and where you can mine for insights. Increasingly, the meetings are digital. So, as an
Mhm.
example, it's not just sales meetings. One toy client that I worked with, they went to Toy Fair and they would go to trade shows around the world. And there were more than 100,000 different customers, so like independent toy stores that they were trying to sell to. Again, it's a B2B4C model.
Mhm.
And it turned out 80% of the customers never went to Toy Fair,
Sure.
right? So how do you reach the other ones? And they had a issue with sales coverage. But what the companies like that are doing is bringing the trade show to the customer digitally, creating events and they're getting more directly involved in creating these peak experiences for the customer. So that's whether it's digital trade shows, digital innovation centers, virtual reality events, there are things companies are doing that actually create mineable conversations that are completely under leveraged in many cases. It's the equivalent of running a sweepstakes or contest, giving the person the prize, and then never mining any of the data that's generated at the end of it.
Yeah,
So you
you
have
don't get the
all these
benefit
resources
for
that are
all the
fallow.
cost. Exactly. There's so
Yeah.
much to be mined if you can just sort of abstract. And it can be, by the way, these interactions can be highly structured where, you as the company dealing with your customer is asking a set of questions. That's a survey kind of concept. But the other thing is it doesn't have to be, right? If you're going through a business process, if you're just having a check-in call, across enough interactions, you start to see trends, opportunities, risks, and that's the key. When you start to realize that these digital conversations are mineable, even though one call may not cover all topics you want to ask, across many interactions, you start to discern trends and opportunities. And that's the
So we
power of these listening technologies today.
so we've been talking about this as we went, but I'm going to kind of elevate the importance of this and ask a follow-up about it about AI.
Sure.
I'm surprised we got this far into the conversation
Yeah.
before, but we've been talking about AI. A lot of the
It's
use
been kind
cases
of part
we've
of
been
the
talking
conversation.
about
Yes.
are powered by AI. So,
Yeah.
you have a bird's eye view, and you've actually been helping work on innovation in these use cases with companies. what are some of the most valuable opportunities you see to incorporate AI into the CX?
Hmm.
And how do you see AI's role evolving, kind of past, present, and future? Because the past will not be the same as the future.
Yeah. So I will, yeah, I mean, I'll use a kind of a Christmas carol analogy here about past, present, and future AI. But to be fair, there has been an AI and CX going back almost 10 years now, right? When we really first embraced AI with Clarabridge and now Qualtrics, we were using effectively, I mean, we think of it as natural language understanding technologies, which is understanding and classifying words into themes, concepts, et cetera. And that was fundamentally using a kind of pattern recognition AI that's been around for a while now. The second generation of AI, which really started to become real maybe 6, 7 years ago, actually almost 10 years ago, so like the early 2010s, was deep learning. And deep learning is what allows your iPhone to recognize who you are versus your wife or your dog when you take pictures. It can also be used to do the same kind of theme detection off of text and language. And we've been using that deep learning capability to recognize a lot of the features like emotion and effort and other things. They're not based on kind of bespoke rules, they're more based on this deep learning technology. The third generation, which is really the generation everyone's excited about right now, is this generative AI, right? This is what OpenAI's GPT does. It's what Bard does. It's what the technologies that are coming out in the open source domain now. There's a whole growing chorus of new capabilities. What generative AI does is it allows you not just to discern and understand and predict or classify something. It can actually take large language data sets or large image feature sets and generate words or pictures or patterns that didn't exist before, right? But that are synthesized just like the human brain synthesizes learning into thoughts. And that's the area that is honestly the most exciting for everybody. Certainly, it is for us as well at Qualtrics. Generative AI allows you to turbocharge summarization. It allows you to turbocharge, coaching and recommendation. Like, how do if I'm a store manager, how do I get better at my job? Let me synthesize all the feedback from my employees, synthesize the feedback from Google reviews or Yelp, and then all the feedback from my online or survey programs. And I get a nice discrete thing saying, here's what you're doing well, here's what you need to do better for your teams, here's the products you're not cooking well, right? You name it. Generative AI can do that for you in a way that you couldn't do even a year or two ago. And then the final thing is generative AI can actually create analytics, right? It can take raw data and it can give you a news report that says, here's the stuff you need to focus on today. Or it can even create a report, right? The traditional role of consultants building dashboards. I wouldn't be surprised if in the next 2 or 3 years, the AI is going to build the dashboards for us, right? It can generate things. And so I still think we're kind of standing on the shoulders of giants in a sense. The language AI, the deep learning AI are all foundational components. The large language model, LLM AI, which is sort of the foundation of generative AI, is that next generation. But it allows every time this new generation comes out, us to understand customers' experiences better, to summarize and distill insights better, and then I think that the new frontier that we're going to start to see over the next 6 to 24 months, it's already starting some of the stuff to come out today, is to be able to synthesize and generate ideas, recommendations that were not trained at all, right? Just based on humans training a machine, but really the machine's learning and understanding, and then interacting directly with humans, which is
So,
scary but also cool.
so
So
to play it back,
yeah,
there's efficiencies we're going to gain through automation and simplifying and summarizing that will make work easier, will automate work, will allow us to save costs that
yeah,
we can reinvest or drop to the bottom line. That's one thing. We'll also be able to innovate the customer experience. As an example, the digital trade shows, all those things I was talking about are powered by personalization and AI. Where if you don't have the technology, it's much harder to deliver those at scale with a
yes.
good experience. When those drive effectiveness benefits. And then there's the insights you drive, which
Right.
enable for continuous improvement of all of these experiences that allow you to get better, faster, and cheaper.
Yeah.
So AI is going to deliver a lot of value. It sounds like in the future, and we've just scratched the surface.
Completely agree. I mean, you summarized it well. And just in the interest of adding my 2 cents, I'll summarize again a lot of the same things. In discrete terms, I see AI today being used first to coach and summarize, right? To help basically help the frontline worker do better at their job and take time and cost out of what they do. The second is it can be used to synthesize insights, right? To essentially replace what is today a manual build and analyze process. The third is it can actually be used as a knowledge acquisition tool, right? So, as an example, I was just talking to my son who has a summer internship at a tech company. He's actually synthesizing code for a project he's building with GPT, right? He's learning how to program by interrogating GPT, right? And in a sense, in any customer facing job, I can use GPT to basically figure out how to solve a customer problem or how to do something I don't know how to do before, right? So it's going to actually aid in knowledge acquisition and knowledge management, knowledge performance for these employees. And then the fourth piece, which is less customer facing, but I think it's important for businesses, is it's a tool for making it easier and faster to build new things, right? Whether it's building a new product or building a new web page or automating a process. Today, that is done highly manually. It's not going to be completely done automatically. Humans still have to kind of prompt the AI to tell it what it wants and then often do quality control and fix it. But I believe that there's also a set of productivity tools that'll come out, all of which will have a big impact on shortening the time to value for our customers, customers, the people that are actually the customer experience purveyors, but also the organizations that support them.
One of the areas that we touched on earlier was the CX EX intersection,
Yeah,
the customer experience, employee experience intersection. And in the past, brand, product, customer, and employee experience were all separate domains that Qualtrics served all four. It's one of the unique things about Qualtrics. It actually serves all four of the domains.
right.
But the intersection of CX and EX was not fully taken advantage of because they were separate offerings with separate use cases.
Yes.
And increasingly, we're actually seeing the intersection of the two. You talked about the front line, the training, understanding what's going on in the experience and improving it. Would love to get your thoughts about what you see as some of the most exciting advances for linking CX and EX.
Well, I'll answer the question in maybe two parts or three parts. The first is to link it, you have to have essentially a data architecture that can link together what in many organizations are disparate data sets. And so we've built a foundation that links employee feedback, customer feedback, but also feedback from many different channels. So it's all accessible by one analytic platform, right? So that's the first step. The second is when you start to bring in disparate data sets, if you can link them to a unifying attribute, right? All the feedback from employees and customers at a location, right? Or all the feedback from agents and customers by call center or by skill area, right? You want to create linkages so that you can start to see correlations, right? And then the third piece is the actual analysis, right? You want to build interesting analytics. So we've essentially built out first the data architecture, then the linkages, and then the analytics. And the analytics do exactly what you're describing, which is if I want to know when people complain about something that are customers, and I see a similar correlation of employees having suggestions or concerns about certain things, try to figure out what has a high correlation with each other. It could be things like, a manager has an impact on morale of employees. Morale tends to correlate with customer service quality perceived by customers. And we actually have seen that with Qualtrics customers that have used these sort of integration. We call them cross-XM use cases because you're crossing employee and customer feedback. The second thing is if you can start to use feedback from employees to make a manager better or use customer feedback to make a product better, right? You're starting to create these cross use cases where you're not just using feedback in one source or channel to improve that one part of the business. You start to share the data across more parts of the business. Then you get more derivative benefit or value, right? People talk about employees and products across many channels. And part of the challenge is it's buried in a channel. But once you bring it together and you link it, you start to see a lot more powerful and I think actionable insights. And that's a big part of what we're trying to do with these cross products.
What's the role of culture in driving a better CX? How can CX leaders play a leadership role in their culture's evolution?
Well, when we think about evolving CX programs, right? Oftentimes, think of it along kind of a maturity curve, right? Organizations that are organizationally less mature in their CX programs often find that they are analyzing either sparsely or in very kind of siloed ways different parts of the customer journey. And so they don't have a cultural awareness because they haven't seen sort of the linkages across the journeys to outcomes. We often find that the first stage of kind of cultural and CX evolution is to spotlight a few areas that they and we, working with them as partners, um, will identify as if we can link these two disparate areas, we'll start to see benefit, and we can start to create a virtuous cycle of learning and changing both where we focus on things, how we focus employee and process improvements, and you start to create essentially an awareness. It's an early form of culture, or at least you are aware you have to do something. Once you start to then link more things together and you bring together more parts of an organization, and by parts I think sales and product and marketing and other areas, now you all are kind of working towards a common cause. You tend to have a bit more of a cultural alignment because you're not just focusing on lagging indicators of performance like sales or margin, but you're now focusing on the leading indicators, which are how do my customers feel about doing business with us? And very quickly, you start to create kind of a cultural focus on the customer is more important. And you have an analytic framework and an actioning framework that's using that feedback from the customer to sort of take decisions, to prioritize actions, and to measure improvements, right? Once that happens and you're doing it across different functions, and you've often got executive sponsorship to do that as well. In fact, you almost always need some degree of executive alignment. That's when you start to be a company that has a culture oriented towards customer experience and experience management. And again, some companies it takes a long time to get there. Other companies, particularly if you have a very visionary leader, it can happen quickly, or a very a tight relationship with an advisor or a partner that's kind of helping you translate the vision to action. But my advice to people is always start where you feel most comfortable, but recognize that you're on a journey, right? And the journey is one where if you start to see success, double down on those investments to drive more success. If you're not careful, you'll start to create that cultural alignment, which is so important to kind of making it a continuous process for listening and improvement.
I'm going to build on something you just said and share a little bit about the name of my company, JourneySpark Consulting, to connect to what you just said, which is there are actually three journeys that you want to spark ideas and improvement on. There's the customer journey.
Mhm.
There's the journey that the company overall is going on to be more customer driven. And then there's your employees' journeys. And all three of those journeys are really important and mutually reinforcing. And if you're intentional about these are the insights I want to develop, these are the behaviors I want to create, this is the culture I want to drive, they will amplify each other, and your improvements to the frontline employee experience will contribute to the customer experience. And the work that you do on your CX initiatives and new ways of working and driving the right behaviors will actually make those initiatives more successful.
I agree with that 100%.
Yeah. Sid, it's always a pleasure to chat. A really interesting conversation. I've always greatly enjoyed working together and driving great innovation and results for clients. And thank you for your time today. And I'm sure our audience will have a lot of questions. If they wanted to follow up on any of the topics, are there any resources or things that you would suggest they take advantage of or look at with Qualtrics to build on some of the themes we talked about?
Yeah, I mean, I would. Well, first of all, Matt, thank you for the opportunity, and likewise. I mean, I've enjoyed getting to know you over the last few years. We've had some great, I think, some successes working together with some of the, the more progressive and also some of the more kind of early stage companies trying to kind of advance their CX programs. And I think we both have a lot of experiences, both good and bad, trying to kind of move things forward, which is I think it's been really helpful for advancing our knowledge and hopefully advancing the space. Specifically to resources, absolutely, I would direct you to the Qualtrics webpage. There's a lot of good content on there, both in terms of the general pages on some of the things we do for frontline experience, employee experience, and some of the ways we're turbocharging a lot of the traditional research programs that people have with AI. There's also some great videos, customer testimonials, and so on that I would encourage them to people to take a look at. And feel free, certainly, if you want to reach out to me directly, I'm reachable. You can find me on Twitter at Sid Banerjee. I'm on Threads now too, and of course LinkedIn. And if you want to reach me personally, my email is sidb@qualtrics.com.
A lot of the blogs and other content on JourneySparkConsulting.com has links to Qualtrics as well. There are shout outs, and some of the things I've written or done were relevant just because of the great collaboration and innovative work that Qualtrics is doing. So thanks again, Sid, and look forward to more conversation. And I hope today's podcast sparks some great ideas for everybody.
Some JourneySparks. There you go. All right. Thank you very much. Thank you, Matt.